Blue Lock's aim is to transform ordinary high school football players into peerless egoists. And even though its merciless selections have weeded out most everyone who does not have what it takes to become the world's greatest striker, there are two players who defy everything that Blue Lock stands for, but have survived nonetheless. This is the story of Seishirou Nagi and Ryosuke Mikage. How they've been built up as long-term foils of Blue Lock's protagonist, Yoichi Isagi, and the massive red flags that recent manga events have planted around them. Hello, my name is Sean, and I break down what makes great stories tick. One of the most effective techniques for communicating a thematic message is juxtaposition. Two characters hold diametrically opposed ideals, and their respective fates inform us of the story's overarching worldview. And this is a technique that Blue Lock, with its larger-than-life cast, really excels at. Perhaps the most memorable instance of this is Kira's fate in the manga's very first chapters. Here, Blue Lock's coach, Jinpachi Ego, unfolds the philosophy with which he wants to revolutionize Japan's football scene. He believes that only a peerless egoist could ever hope to become the world's greatest striker. All of Blue Lock's candidates are of course flabbergasted by this audacious claim. After all, for their entire football career, they've been taught that football is a sport about teamwork, about fostering bonds with other players. And then, one lone player dares to speak up against Ego's views. This is Ryosuke Kira, the rising star of Japanese high school football. Kira is the poster child of a conventional team player, the embodiment of everything that Ego is trying to snuff out. And Kira says that he only is going to join the Blue Lock program because he's hell-bent on proving that Ego's innovative approach is misguided. But then, just one chapter later, all this leads to the manga's first major plot twist. Kira is actually the first one to fail Blue Lock's selections, and he is never seen again. What's so brilliant about this twist is that hardly anyone will have seen it coming. After all, Kira has got the design and a mentality of a typical shonen hero, and he is one of only 3 characters with any significant amount of spotlight in Chapter 1. So by the end of Chapter 2, Blue Lock definitively proves that this is not your typical sports manga. It first builds up Kira as the representation of conventional football values. In other words, of everything that Ego despises, before forcefully removing him. And with this, we come to understand that Kira was a necessary sacrifice. Ego can only start raising a new type of football player once he has purged the established order. And this brings us to Seishirou Nagi and Ryosuke Mikage, where Kira represents the most cut and dry opposition to Blue Lock's philosophy of egoism. Nagi and Mikage serve as more complicated foils to Blue Lock's ideals. Ryo, for one, is the pampered heir of the Mikage Corporation. For all of his life, he could get whatever he wished for. But despite living in this lap of luxury, he actually never found something that he really wanted, until one day he discovered the dream that was finally worth pursuing: winning the Football World Cup. And not long after that, Mikage stumbles upon Nagi and bears witness to Nagi's extraordinary ability to trap stuff. Mikage immediately knew that he had struck gold. He had found a natural talent. He had found someone who he wants at any cost. The only problem? Nagi has no interest in football at all. He just wants to live as lazily as possible. So That brings us to their first encounter with Blue Lock's protagonist, Yoichi Isagi. Nagi and Mikage are the stars of the final team that Isagi and his teammates face in Blue Lock's first selection rounds. In fact, Nagi has the highest goal count of all the players in their division. And that even though he actually couldn't care less. In his introduction scene, the manga stresses that he's so lazy that he can't even be bothered to chew his own foods, and that Mikage has to carry him around instead of making Nagi walk by himself. So in other words, this point shows that Mikage is carrying Nagi both literally and figuratively. After all, without Mikage's insistence, Nagi wouldn't even be playing football in the first place. And we see this on the playing field as well. Nagi might score some of the most breathtaking goals in the entire series, but he takes absolutely zero initiative during the match itself. Really, it's all up to Mikage to enable his plays and make the best of Nagi's innate abilities. But then, everything changes for Nagi in the match against Isagi and his team. For the first time, he experiences a setback, and as a result, Nagi suddenly gets interested in the sport and starts acting on his own accords. Specifically, he develops a fascination with Isagi. And as a result, he actively chooses to team up with Isagi rather than his usual partner Mikage during Blue Lock's second selection round. So, up to this point, it seems like the journeys of Mikage and Nagi perfectly encapsulate everything that Blue Lock is trying to achieve. We have two boys who originally wanted nothing at all, and they have now awakened their inner egoism and have finally started pursuing goals of their own. That is, until the most recent story arc, because it's here that we learn that their ostensible growth was all for nothing. That their egos, despite all the development they have received, still fall short. In fact, recent manga events put them on the trajectory of a negative character arc. They are no longer on course to become true egoist strikers, but rather, they seem to revert to their state at the beginning of the story. Let me explain why. We're now in the Neo Egoist League Arc, where all the Blue Lock players join the under-20 division of one of Europe's top football clubs and duke it out against each other. And this time, Nagi and Mikage select the same club, Manchester City. Or, if you prefer Blue Lock's thinly veiled alias, Manshine City. And by the time that Isagi faces off against them again, they have undergone Manchester's unique training program and substantially improved since their last appearance. It's Mikage in particular who stands out at the start of the match. He has now stopped relying on Nagi and become a formidable player in his own right. Most importantly here, he seems to have finally embraced Blue Lock's philosophy. At this point, he is aiming at becoming nothing less than the very best striker in the world, for the first time in the manga. But despite all these improvements, it's still not enough. Even when he shoots the best shot he has to offer, Mikage fails to score a goal. Meanwhile, Manchester has also invested significant efforts into leveling up Nagi. Manchester's coach rightly spotted that Nagi's plays lack creativity. He might excel at making the best of a given situation, but he never gave much thought to his own tactics. And so, what Manchester does is push Nagi to play a more active style of football. They're essentially giving him a toolset that could make him into the best genius football player in the whole world. But, just like with Mikage, Nagi fails his first attempt to score using this new approach. And what's more, Nagi is visibly frustrated by all the energy it takes to play creatively. It's only now that he realizes just how much thinking Mikage and Isagi do, and he can't help but find it a massive pain. And as a result, Nagi soon reaches the conclusion that active football is a dead end for him. He still doesn't understand what Manchester is really trying to teach him, he isn't doing well at it, and most of all, he's not having any fun. What's particularly important here is that Nagi's frustration with this new style of football represents a marked juxtaposition to Isagi's developments in the very same match. A few chapters later, Isagi realizes that he can process even more visual data by making use of his peripheral vision. And the manga here pulls all the stops to emphasize just how much Isagi is thinking during every split second. I've actually rarely seen a manga use walls of text to such great effect. And Isagi's a player who really thrives with this active, calculating style of football. For him, football has now become even more enjoyable than it's ever been before. What's more, Isagi's coach from Bayern München, who also happens to be the best striker in the world, acknowledges that Isagi's breakthrough has the potential to make him nothing less than the next number one. So, with all this, Blue Lock emphasizes just how much the tables have turned since Nagi's first appearance. Nagi's natural talents might have given him a head start, but at this point in the story, his shallow, passive ego lacks the ability to break through the ceiling that he needs to break through to become the world's greatest striker. So, in other words, Nagi and Mikage have both tried to surpass their limits, but unlike Isagi, they failed to do so. And in the face of a seemingly insurmountable wall, they definitively prove that they do not have what it takes to become number one. Because in response to all this, the two of them fall back on their play style from the very beginning of the story. And in doing so, pour all their development since that point down the drain. Nagi acknowledges that he did have fun back when he was playing with Mikage, and he asks his friend for help one more time. And the thing is, this works. With Mikage's guidance, the two play on a more advanced level than ever before. Now that they're working together again, they feel like they're on top of the world. And as a result, Nagi scores the most spectacular goal of his life. A 5-stage fake-out shot. Not only that, but this extraordinary goal immediately goes viral on social media. So, Nagi and Mikage team up again, and they reach their highest level of play thus far. So now, what's the problem with this? First of all, both of them backtrack all their development from the past 150 chapters. Nagi willfully becomes reliant on his teammate again. And that's the very thing that was identified as his fatal flaw before the start of the match. And Mikage, meanwhile, stops striving to become the greatest striker in the world himself. Instead, he decides to invest all his ego into making Nagi a player who can win the World Cup. But Mikage's new approach flies in the face of everything that Blue Lock stands for. After all, the very first chapter made it clear that Japan can never win a single World Cup by fostering bonds between players. So when Mikage thinks that he can turn Blue Lock into a stepping stone for his own aspirations, we're to understand that he's basically putting the cart before the horse. There are also two characters in particular who are not at all impressed by Nagi's miraculous goal, Jinpachi Ego and Yoichi Isagi. Both of them note that this is the kind of goal that Nagi will never ever be able to reproduce. And Ego foresees that this short-term success will soon test the depths of Nagi's ego. and given all that we know about Nagi's lackluster drive, my alarm bells here are going off like crazy. More than that, this notion of replicating goals calls back the very first showdown between Isagi and the Nagi-Mikage duo. Before this match, Ego teaches Isagi's team about a fundamental prerequisite to become a world-class striker. What they need is a formula to reliably produce goals. And so, it's Isagi's main challenge in this match to discover a formula to score goals based on his personal skill sets. In fact, that's exactly why Nagi was such a suitable opponent at that stage of the story. It's a match that offered a thematic contrast between Isagi, who was searching for a formula to score, and Nagi, the player who never bothered with something like that in the first place. And so it's quite telling that the moment when Isagi won the match coincided with him discovering said formula. So on a thematic level, Isagi could only surpass a vastly superior enemy by transcending the realm of miracles and taking the first step to become a world-class striker. And on this front, Nagi's earlier character arc seems to be a red herring as well. During his time as Isagi's teammate, he too finally starts searching for a formula to turn his skills into a reliable way to score goals. But then, when push comes to shove in his time with Manchester, Nagi abandons this way of thinking. He runs back to the realm of miracles that he had earlier tried to leave behind. And in a more abstract sense, this is kind of true for Mikage as well. What they effectively did was hand their son a proven formula for success in life: to go to a top college and climb up the corporate ladder. But Mikage rejected this in favor of his own pipe dream. So when Mikage made an egoistic decision here, which is normally the hallmark of a great player in Blue Lock, the manga is also highlighting that he's the kind of person who doesn't follow the right path to fulfill his dreams. In that light, it's particularly interesting how Blue Lock parallels Mikage and Isagi. Both of them play an intellectual, strategic style of football. During the Bayern-Manchester match, for example, we see both of them trying to anticipate the other's plays and to outmaneuver each other. Mikage is the first one who seems to outpredict Isagi, but Isagi is the one who has the last laugh. Moreover, Isagi notices that Mikage also seems to be making use of the same type of peripheral vision that he had discovered earlier in that match. Just look at the similarity between the focalization of Isagi's and Mikage's thought processes during this game. But where Isagi has actively awakened this ability, Mikage seems to be using it subconsciously. All this then underscores that Mikage is in a way a lesser version of Isagi. So, in a sense then, it's no surprise that Nagi replaces Mikage with Isagi, essentially the better version of Mikage, during the second selection round. So, with all this, I honestly think that there is no way forward for Mikage and Nagi. They were shown the path to become the world's greatest striker, but ultimately they fell short. This duo seems to have been built up over long term to prove a thematic point. That you might get far with extraordinary talent, but in the end, it's one's mentality that separates the wheat from the chaff. And if all this whetted your appetite for more Blue Lock analysis, I've got another video on the major conflict of the current story arc for you to devour. And yes, that was a Blue Lock pun. In fact, the very video that you're watching now actually came about because I had all this material that I wanted to discuss but couldn't fit it within the scope of my earlier analysis. So, Don't be shy. Go check out this video here if you haven't yet. And if you like what I'm doing, subscribe for more manga analysis content every other week.